So today I'm making new garden beds right on top of my driveway here using these straw bales. So straw bale gardening is essentially just a subset of raised bed gardening, where instead of having a normal raised bed with some walls, might be made out of metal or wood, and you fill it with soil or maybe some sort of soilless growing medium. Straw bale gardens use the straw bale itself as both the raised bed and the growing medium. Now you can't just grow directly in any old straw bale like this. You have to do some preparation first, which I'm going to show today. So this technique is very similar to my hotbeds, my lasagna mulching, my hugelkultur beds. Basically all it is growing in partially decomposed organic matter, basically growing in unfinished compost. Straw has quite a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, somewhere around 80:1, which is quite a bit higher than the around 30:1 you want to make good compost. So in order to fix that, we need to do what's called conditioning the bales, which basically requires us to add some nitrogen source to the bales. Now the original method, as described in the book Straw Bale Gardening, generally just involves using some synthetic store-bought fertilizer. Lawn fertilizer is actually the most recommended. I got this Gulf Green all-purpose fertilizer. It was basically just the cheapest one there. It was on clearance and I am poor. So this cost me about $16 and there's enough to do several bales here, more than I need actually. I'm going to use this to condition 2 bales, and then the other 2 bales I'm going to condition with things like coffee grounds and other organic waste I can get for free within my community. Now the book Straw Bale Gardening does give recommendations on how to do this with organic fertilizer bought from the store as well. The issue is buying that much organic fertilizer from the store tends to be pretty expensive, certainly more than I want to be spending on this. The author of Straw Bale Gardens claims that both his organic and non-organic straw bale beds perform equally well. So I thought it would be fun to test this using my own custom method where I use instead of store-bought fertilizer, just organic matter that is higher in nitrogen and some other nutrient sources to condition these bales. So because I'm doing these 2 groups, I can basically just directly compare the results of the 2 methods and see if I notice any difference between them. Because I like to keep things weird, I'm also going to be trying to inoculate these bales with some mushrooms via stem butt method, as I've shown many times on my Instagram. So without any further ado, let's get her going. To start things off, I just removed the logs at the edge of my driveway that I've been using as a border. I just didn't want to have a little awkward gap between the beds behind it and the straw bale that stuff could fall down into. So the first thing I'm going to do is rake back all this driveway gravel. Not because it would be problematic to have it under there, but simply because I want it on my driveway, not under my garden beds. I just made sure the bales fit the way I wanted them to. I did have to put the 4th bale in a different orientation, which isn't ideal because it'll get different sun exposure. But putting it the other way was going to block my pathway into my yard, which wasn't going to work. I laid down some wood chips to make a little bit of a platform and level off the area the bales are sitting on. These will also provide some extra food for the mushrooms I'm trying to grow. I scored a couple of about to expire packs of king oyster mushroom this morning. If you're not familiar, oyster mushrooms grow very aggressively and can actually just be grown from stem cuttings essentially. It's called stem butt method and it's essentially a very, very primitive form of tissue culture. I paid just over $2 a pack for these, and these are going to be my source of mushroom inoculant for this grow. So all I'm going to do is take the stems of the mushrooms and just simply loosely dice them up. I'm just going to take a few handfuls of these chunks of mushroom stem and spread them on top of my wood chips here. So both of the conventional bales are just going to get half a cup of this fertilizer sprinkled on at this point, and I will be adding more fertilizer with each watering as per the procedure outlined in the book. So for the other 2 bales, it's going to be a bit more involved because I'm working with solid nitrogen sources, right? These aren't just water-soluble nitrogen sources that I can just put on top and water and it'll be carried down into the bale like the fertilizer is, right? Coffee grounds are not water-soluble. So I'm going to take this little crowbar and just basically stab it in here into my bale so I can work a bunch of this down into the bale. And I'm also going to be taking some handfuls of my mushroom pieces and jamming them down into those holes I'm creating as well to help inoculate the bale in more places. I'm putting chunks of the mushrooms in the bales for both the conventional and the organic options. Once again, I'm doing this just to get the sources of nitrogen and other nutrients worked throughout the bale. Will help ensure that all the areas of the bale break down consistently and have lots of nutrients, and there aren't areas that are just straw. I get these coffee grounds for free from my local coffee shop. Shout out Fix Coffee. They're nice enough to collect them and set them aside for me so I can compost them and use them for garden projects instead of them just going into the landfill. Okay, I got a bunch of coffee worked into the one side. Now I'm going to flip it over. And I'm just going to repeat that same process on the other side to get lots of stuff worked into this bale. Now, I'm not just using coffee grounds. I've also got this bucket of basically bokashi starter I made. This is basically spent brewer's grain that's got some lactobacillus and some other microbes cultured up on it, so it's been anaerobically fermented already. So I actually made this with the intention of dehydrating it and using it for bokashi compost, but because I've got it on hand and I want some variety in my nitrogen sources, I'm going to use some of it in these bales as well. This did take a pretty long time, so I'm just going to skip ahead to the end and save you all the pain of watching me do this for 10 minutes. Okay, this bale's all done. Now I just have to do it again with one more. So I've also got a small amount of homemade bone meal I made, which I'm going to sprinkle on top of my organic bales. This will provide some extra calcium and phosphorus. I've also got a bucket of wood ash from my fireplace. Wood ash is really high in potassium as well as trace minerals. So once again, I'm just going to dust the surface of my 2 organic bales with this, and when I water it, it'll carry it down throughout the bale. I'm going to put these logs back in place. I'm going to have to cut the one. So both of my conventional store-bought fertilizer bales are just going to get plain water now to get them hydrated. It takes quite a bit to hydrate straw, so I'm going to basically hydrate them a little bit at a time over the next few days. I need to come back and add more fertilizer to the non-organic bales anyways, so I will just keep watering them as I do that. Now for my organic bales, I'm doing something a little bit different. I've got a jug here that is full of trub, which is basically a high nitrogen brewery waste from the bottom of fermenters. I'm going to do basically half trub and half water. I'm just doing this to add some extra nitrogen that's in a bit more of a liquid form to help fill in any of the areas that I didn't get any of the coffee grounds or spent grain into. So that's it for today. I will be adding more synthetic fertilizer to the 2 non-organic bales, and I'll be adding more water to all of these bales just about every day for the next 2 weeks to make sure they get breaking down nicely. One note on the orientation of your bales is that I've technically got these sitting the wrong way. The strings actually run across the top, and you want them running around the side normally. And generally you're meant to be planting into the side that's got the cut straw, where you can kind of see all the holes lined up in the top of the straw. The issue is, because of the shape of these particular bales, if I did that, my beds would be really tall and narrow, which I didn't want. I wanted them to have the flat side out, so I have more surface area to plant into. So I'm doing them on their side like this, even though it's technically not the right way to do it. This is my first time trying true straw bale gardens where I leave the bales whole like this. Normally I simply take the bales apart and build beds out of them that way. So in his book Straw Bale Gardens, Joel Karsten actually specifically says that if your straw bales fall apart, you can't use them for gardening in. At that point you just have to throw them in the compost, which I totally disagree with. This bed here is a bed of straw with a bunch of added spent brewer's grain and some kitchen scraps and things like that to add the nitrogen to help it break down. But I've taken the bale apart completely, and the result is that the bed is actually about 3 times the size in area of a single straw bale with just 1 bale's worth of straw. It's just half the height. Now, if you've got a bad back or bad knees or something, maybe you'd like to have the straw bale height to make it so you don't have to bend down quite as far, and that's totally fine. But in my experience, you can absolutely take your bales apart and make your straw bale gardens like that. I don't agree with what it says in the book about the compression of the straw bale being uniquely important for growing. The only real issue I see with doing your bed this way is that without that compression, your straw is going to settle over time. So you might end up with a bed like this where the surface is a little bit lumpy, right? It's not quite as level. because some of the areas have settled more than others. And that doesn't bother me personally at all, and in my experience, it won't affect the growth of your plants at all either. In my opinion, the main benefit to keeping the bales wrapped up and square like they are is simply that it's neat and tidy and keeps it in a convenient form factor to use. Another great thing about using the intact bales is that they have a very deep growing area, so the bale can be just a kind of self-sufficient growing environment. You don't need any soil underneath for it to grow. In my case, I'm putting it at the end of the driveway where it's relatively compacted soil, but people build gardens like this on pavement and concrete and things like that, right? Where you're only growing in the bale. So the benefit for me here having this shallow bed is that, at least for deep-rooted plants like tomatoes and peppers, the root area or rhizosphere of the plants is going to kind of extend down into the native soil here because this bed is only actually about 6 or 8 inches thick. And since this greenhouse was built on top of my existing garden where I had really nice soil last year, I can reap the benefits of that good soil in these beds as well. So I did the same thing as this last year in my old greenhouse where I put a straw bed in there to grow crops in the spring and all through the summer, and it worked great. I had great results. And if you go far enough back on my Instagram, you can see the old videos where I showed that. But unfortunately, the videos are terrible because I was just figuring out how to do things. But if you do want to see it, I guess, proceed at your own risk. You can go back and find them. So this bed is already breaking down and it's got plants in it already and it's in the greenhouse. So obviously it's not going to be a direct comparison, but I am excited to see how this bed compares to the beds I just made out front over this growing season. That's it for today's video. Follow along if you want to see how this project goes over the growing season, and I'll catch you guys next time.